Thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm Piotr. I'll pass around two keyboards, just look at them, pass them on. One of them is technically wireless in that the USB port broke off, so it doesn't work. The other one, it's probably not very comfortable to plug it in this environment, but I have a cable. If you want to try it later, then you're more than welcome. I'm very thankful for PJ for doing this informal check, because most of you won't know that I'm reusing a joke from 2 conferences ago. There's a lunch right after this talk, so I'm in a very special position where I'm between you and your food, so I'll try to be A, interesting, B, fairly quick. A bit of a disclaimer. I did propose proper Ruby talks to this conference. I actually, if you have been to the previous conferences, I try to stick to those kinds of talks. I had a hunch none of them might get accepted, so I proposed also this one. None of those in together got accepted, but then I got a last-minute email saying something that you know of an actual grown-up speaker with a great technical talk can't make, and showing us that hobby of yours instead. So here I am, here you are. I hope you enjoy. I gave this talk only once before at Eurocamp. So the history of the original CFP proposal is that I wasn't trolling. I really like this subject. I just submitted it on a whim, and here you are, and here we all are. The premise of this talk is this quote from Joy Hess. It's a quite well-known Debian developer. If it doesn't have a keyboard, I feel that my thoughts are being forced out through a straw. And I think this is very true. I'm very amazed at the work the on-screen keyboards made, all kinds of text inputs, like voice inputs or text inputs where you swipe through the keyboard. These are wonderful. They are so much better than they were 3 years ago. But I still think that for a lot of, at least my daily work, like using something else than a keyboard feels like using this to put in information. So this is one of my favorite pictures. It's an old iPhone running Midnight Commander, standing on a Zippo, and still being controlled by a Bluetooth keyboard or some kind of Apple wireless. I don't know, maybe it's like one of the original iPhones without Bluetooth, but there was always a way to connect an external keyboard to an iPhone, and there were cases where this was like really, really useful. One of the keyboards that I admire the most is the ThinkPad 701C1, which it was a top-selling notebook PC, and it has a butterfly keyboard. And the design of this keyboard is so interesting. I'll try to show you a video of it, like a few-second video. Actually, this laptop is in Museum of Modern Art in New York because of this keyboard. Watching the keyboard fall and fold itself again and again created a sense of childlike glee that most adults find hard to replicate without drugs. So let's see whether it works. Video on a conference wireless, here we go. But you know, I play it again because it's like a super quick video, but it's basically, it's a 10.4-inch laptop with a kind of standard size ThinkPad keyboard. So this is one of, I didn't own this laptop. It's a 1995 model, but I really enjoy at least watching this video now and then, which probably should put me on the certain point of the spectrum of this kind of hobbies. I got into mechanical keyboards thanks to this person, Łukasz Korecki. This was his keyboard at the time. If you don't see that very well, it's not that it's not focused. It doesn't have any letters on it. It does have a Trololo key, and it also has some like 4 groups of Lego, like 3 groups of Lego head keys on the function buttons, and there's obviously a Vim key on the escape button. So there are 2 parts to this talk. The first is about hardware. It's by far the much larger part. The second is about software and configuration. This is the typical, like 3 years ago, it was a typical Mac keyboard. I want to say that I really enjoy the way the Mac keyboards evolved, and I actually enjoyed that kind of construction of the keys back then. I don't subscribe to the notion that those keyboards are like very bad. They're not mechanical keyboards, but as far as non-mechanical keyboards go, both this and the holy grail of ThinkPad keyboards are among the most useful, but there are people who have this kind of views. If you're referring to Apple's desktop keyboards, the solution is much the same as with Apple mice. You unplug the Apple-provided piece of shit, throw it away, and plug in something that doesn't suck. Actually, the keyboard being small, thin, and light is handy for dropping on the crash cart and the data center, British person, partly because it's easy to hold in one's teeth while halfway up a ladder and swearing at a Linux box, and partly because it's a piece of shit and therefore won't go walkabouts. As I said, I don't subscribe to this notion, but there are people who have very strong feelings about keyboards outside of the stage. So it's not like very, very small niche. It's actually quite a big niche. The Hate Software mailing list is a very old mailing list that it's mostly on archive now. And if you enjoy this kind of rants, then try to look into the archives. Maybe you'll find something interesting. This is a very, very classic mechanical keyboard. It's an IBM Model M keyboard from a long time ago. And this is a contemporary Model M keyboard that is still being produced and sold by Unicomp. And the main difference between this and this are these two kind of like two Windows keys and one context menu key. So this model was so popular, but also such well-designed inside, which we'll see in a second, that it's still being produced. And if you say, well, that's okay, but I love my ThinkPad keyboards, for example, with this pointing stick in the middle, so I don't have to reach for my mouse. Unicomp actually does those with this pointing stick and two mouse buttons in here. So if you're this kind of person who really doesn't like compromises, this might be a keyboard for you. This is the way this keyboard operates, and inside there's a buckling spring that contracts, and when it contracts too much, it basically breaks, and then it registers the key press. So you have like non-linear response time, and you have tactile feedback of when a given key press is being registered. And this is what makes this keyboard very different than, for example, laptop keyboards. But we'll get to the key switches part a little bit later. IBM was not always very good at keyboards. This is an IBM PC Junior keyboard, which was so bad that people ascribe the IBM PC Junior flop at least partly to this keyboard. Like, it was worse than ZX Spectrum keyboard, and we loved our ZX Spectrum. So, basically rubber keys, absolutely horrible. But still, the same people built later the IBM Model M and later the IBM ThinkPad keyboard. So they do learn. This is the way a lot of laptop keyboards are being built, which is there's some backplate, there's some thin foil layer with some circuits in it and rubber domes, and then some chiclet keys on top of it. This is as good as you can go with a laptop, except a very narrow niche of gaming laptops, which are quite thick and actually have mechanical keyboards. So there are laptops with mechanical keyboards built in, but they are very, very rare. And this is how most laptop keyboards work. But the way most mechanical keyboards that people use are keyboards that use this kind of switches, and I can hear that my keyboards are making their way up the auditorium. So they are using this kind of Cherry MX switches, but it's one of the wonderful and very sadly one of the last use cases of universality in technology or interoperability. There is a producer, there are a few, there's Gateron, there's Cherry, there are a few more, who produce switches, and they are standardized in a way that other companies can produce keyboards and just solder on those switches, and other companies still can produce the keycaps, and they all interoperate. It's sadly a very rare thing in nowadays technology. So these are examples of this kind of switches. If you want, you can take off one of the keycaps and see that indeed there are switches in there. These are the ones on both of those keyboards are Cherry MX Browns. I'll get to why those in a minute. There are 35 different switches in here, but if you look closely, there's a set of 4 that gets repeated and repeated by different producers, and there's a black ones, red ones, brown ones, and blue ones. And these are the 4 major, most popular colors. There are other colors. There's a certain well-known Ruby speaker who might be speaking here tomorrow who uses the green ones, and I assume he'll convince you that that's actually the better choice. And when I was buying those keyboards, the green ones weren't offered, but I stick by my current assumption that browns are the better choice. But let's see why, how do they differ? So this is the way the red Cherry MX switch operates. And what's interesting here is that it has a linear response time. So basically, it's the same hardness to push all the way down. And this is how it operates. Basically, at some point, it makes this connection and the key press registers, and if you look closely, it's way before it gets all the way to down. And this is important because a lot of people believe that the proper way of using mechanical keyboard is in a way that they don't bottom out. So you don't hit the keys all the way down, you just hit them, press them strong enough to register the key press, but not all the way down. I was told a lot of gamers prefer those keyboards, like those linear switches, because they are, especially in games where you have to be quick, like, I don't know, first-person shooters or something like this, because they are like very good at registering the keystrokes in a very in a manner that you can foresee well. Like they are better at consistently, that's the word, registering key presses than for example, other kinds of keyboards. The black ones are very similar, it just the slope is higher, which means they are just harder to press, so you have to push harder. The brown ones, which I prefer, have something that is called tactile feedback. If you look here, there's like a bump, and the way it works is you feel when the key will register. So there's a bump in the strength with which you have to press the key. You probably won't notice it at first, even though you are. There are 2 of those keyboards making rounds, but this is the tactile feedback one that I prefer. And then there are blue ones, which are the original clicky ones. They also have like additional part that makes a lot of noise. And like you can hear that those brown ones also make noise, but this is actually a keyboard with the clicky keyboard. So the clicky switches, the ones with audible feedback. So we also register a key press not only by having like this bump, but also you can hear it. So again, a kind of non-obvious feedback that you learn over time to recognize when the key actually registers. This is a kind of comparative chart. There are also the, I think these are the clear ones that have, they are not, I'm not sure whether they are clicky. I think they are not clicky, and they just have a higher slope than the brown ones. So non-clicky, but with tactile feedback. This is one of my favorite tweets about keyboards, because David Brady, once he got into mechanical keyboards, he went all the way in, and this is what his wife said, I think, when he was working from home. But there's also this kind of quote. I have from Abdi Grimm. I have precisely zero nostalgia for old clacky keyboards. That said, having typed for a couple of years on the standard Cherry Browns that usually come with the Kinesis Advantage series, I can say that I get it. There is a level of comfort and even pleasure in long stints of typing, such as writing this article, that I simply never experienced before I started typing on high-quality mechanical keyboards. I now know what bottoming out means on a kinesthetic level. I have a strong sense of the fatigue that my laptop keyboard induces which is absent from my home setup. And I use ThinkPads, which still have the best laptop keyboards in the business, bar none. This is his article about spending $350 on a computer keyboard. The ones that are circulating were, I think, about $100 each, so it's not that expensive necessarily, but the Kinesis one has a lot of very nice features, especially if you're either suffering from wrist issues or suspect that you might in the future. So there are also very healthy advantages of using mechanical keyboards, not necessarily the ones with the very classic layouts, but ones with different layouts as well. This is one of my favorite animation gifs about mechanical keyboards, which is when your new keyboard finally shows up. The mechanical keyboards Reddit is with a huge disclaimer that yes, it is a Reddit, so unfortunately it also exhibits some of the not that stellar features of Reddit community, but in general it's fairly welcoming, and there's a lot of interesting stuff. You can also just lurk and see the things people discuss and show around. Keycaps. Keycaps are the thing that are the most visible about mechanical keyboards. They are replaceable. There are various plastic types. You probably didn't notice, and I certainly felt that it's a very hipster thing that a lot of people just talk about, but never actually happens. But unfortunately, about half a year after using one of those keyboards, I realized that I do feel it. There's a different plastic on the keys. One are PBT, one are ABS. And there are actually, one of them are softer, and it actually registers after you type long enough. So I actually replaced all of the keys on one of those keyboards with a different set because I felt in my fingertips, which was a super scary thought, and I'm not sure, like, hopefully it's not something universal, but I did feel the difference. There are various plastic types. There are various discussions whether the keys should be labeled. As you can see in one of those keyboards, I went with blanks. And it was a very interesting experience. It definitely makes sure that you touch type and don't look at your keyboard when you're typing, because it's actually easier to type on a blank keyboard when you don't look at it, because then at least your brain pretends there are letters there. But also, I don't think it was such a wise choice, because now and then when I make a typo in my password, then I look down, and there's no way I can put the password in properly on that keyboard in the next few minutes. I think my favorite solution for now is something that is called ninja labeling, which are key labels that are on the vertical, like in front. I show it in a second. They are on the keys, but not on the top of the keys, so you don't see them when you look down, but they're on the front of the keys. So if you need to, you can see them, but in general, the keyboard kind of guides you towards not looking at the keyboard when you type. And also you can make custom, the ones at the top row on the orange one, some of them are custom made. I just selected some images like the Snoopy one on a keyboard, and I just ordered a custom key with a Snoopy typing on his keyboard. This is like typical example, the Vim community favorite set of HJKL keycaps, but there are also things like Zelda heart keys, and you can put them on your number keys or anywhere else. There's a Mario and Luigi set. The thing that might be visible here, not necessarily maybe yes, maybe no, is that they are differently shaped, because in most mechanical keyboards, the different rows have different shapes, which basically means if you have a labeled keys, you change a layout and you rearrange your keys, then it might be a very uncomfortable typing situation. I wanted to try to show this to you. So the orange keyboard, the bottom row has some keys that are in different shape than they should be, and there are function keys. And if you get a hold of it, you can see that they actually are of different shapes. There's a Breaking Bad set with kind of clear see-through keys that are kind of rubber-like. There are ones with textures. If you like, you can order any kind of texture you like, if you can draw it in a black and white. And it goes further. This is the Booper Pantheon. These are keys with shapes, and obviously probably you don't want to put those on the keys that you use regularly, but it can be a very helpful key if you need to soldier through some dead march towards a deadline that your team won't make it. At least you'll have a nice key set to do that on. Going further, the die set with certain heroes of I think mostly comic universe, and then there's a 3PO. There's also this one. The Reddit community is not very strong on very subtle jokes, but it's a Thor key, and you can have this for escape. And also people do all kinds of different layouts, and obviously you don't if you're not hitting the right keys, looking down at this keyboard won't help you, but it will make you happier probably. One of the popular sets, it's called 1976, and it's this kind of set of this kind of colors. If you have ever seen this poster with 1976 in these colors, you will recognize this pattern. I really love this one. If you saw the Grand Budapest Hotel movie, this is a one. This is a homage to this. There are hotel keys. There's a lobby boy. There's a Mendel's, that was the bakery shop. There's like escape key is custom and so on and so forth. Like it goes very deep. Like people make custom hand-woven sleeves. This is the Skeletor. If I don't know how many of you even recognize Masters of the Universe and He-Man, but this is the Skeletor from the He-Man universe color set. This is my favorite. This is from the Troubled Minds keycap set. There's even the J is the proper Joker J, and there's like a ha key, which I would love to have, and like escape key custom. So it's a very broad community, and a lot of custom key sets are out there. When it comes to widths, there's three major types: the full keyboard, the medium one, which basically loses the numeric keypad, so something akin most of your laptops are medium ones. The small ones, both of those that circulate are small ones. There are 60-something keys. And then there are the smaller ones, which I'll show you in a second. The typical full-size keyboard is the Model M. This is a typical mid keyboard that's usually called 10 keyless because it doesn't have the numeric the numeric part, but it has still all of the function buttons, and it usually also has this arrow block and those keys. And then the keyboards get smaller and smaller. This is Richard Stallman's Happy Hacking keyboard. I don't really subscribe to the notion that the fewer keys, the better. I mean, there are clearly places on this keyboard where you could put useful keys, but maybe I'm not pure enough. I also use a lot of plugins in my Vim, and I actually use, the V improved mode, so maybe it's just, maybe I'm just not there yet. This is a minivan keyboard. It's well, the advantage of this keyboard, like the disadvantage, of course, is that you can't even put numbers without pressing a modifier key. But then the advantage is it almost fits in your pocket. And even though it's a minivan keyboard, and most keyboards smaller than 10 keyless lose the arrow keys, there is a minivan variant with the arrow keys. And this is, of course, as you can imagine, a very contagious aspect of the keyboard community. People who really want to have arrow keys, and people who basically believe that arrow keys should be removed from all keyboards ever, or remapped to something actually useful. I'm very strongly in the former camp. I really like my arrow keys. I even use them in Vim, which probably makes me right. So I like the first check I always do is whether I can remap something to arrow keys that actually resembles an arrow key setup. But over time, maybe I'm one of the few old dogs who can be taught new tricks. We'll see. This is a JD40 keyboard, smaller still. The smallest that I actually saw people use are only 3 rows of keys, but you probably could go all the way to this 2-key keyboard from the beginning of the talk with a 0 and a 1. I love this quote from Paul Butley: "CoffeeScript is what happens when you look at the top row of your keyboard and think, hey, JavaScript isn't using some of those." When he tweeted this, I looked at the top row of my keyboard at the time and surely hoped nobody is going to take it very literally. That was my first mechanical keyboard. It had blue switches, and then I replaced the keys with something unlabeled. And then my wife basically said, I can't watch a movie on headphones in the next room when you're typing, which probably also was coincidental with the fact that I suddenly had a room to my own at the office. But over time, I switched from the one with the blue switches into the one with brown switches, and currently we have a 3-person room at the office where somehow we all use mechanical keyboards, and everybody goes to other rooms. This is the keyboard that makes the rounds mostly. There's if you look closely, the space bar here is put in like properly. The one that is making the rounds have this reversed. A lot of people believe that putting the spacebar in reverse makes it easier to hit with your thumbs. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't tried this. And just to clear any obvious by now assumption that some of you made, I come from a post-communist country. I do remember how it was before the regime change. That button up there is backspace, so when you press it, sometimes things you want disappear, sometimes things you don't want to disappear still disappear. So don't take it as any kind of strong manifesto. It's there mostly for trolling purposes right next to the troll button, and I probably now made both sides of the debate very angry at me, but well. Anyway, this is my current keyboard, the other one that makes rounds. It's also super nice, it's a bit larger, it has this additional row of keys here. I got it mostly, first because this one, as I said, become wireless in a way that, like maybe it is a proper Bluetooth keyboard, it just doesn't work with devices, but it's probably just a wired keyboard that USB broke off, and it was at that time quicker for me to order a new keyboard than to fix that one, and I'll eventually, of course, fix it, but just didn't get to it. I'll get back to the advantage of this one in a second. This is the one that I'll probably get next. This is Ducky Air, and this is actually wireless mechanical keyboard, and it has like replaceable module with batteries, so it can work as a wireless keyboard on batteries, and then with any device like your phone or your tablet, or you can replace it with a wired module, and then it doesn't need batteries and works as any kind of wired keyboard. And it still has arrows, so I'm very keen on having like this option. When it comes to software, one big thing is layouts, like, you know, do you use QWERTY, are you German, do you use Dvorak, do you use Coleman, do you use Norman, do you use Workman, I think. This is a wonderful quote from Wendell Munro, Dvorak typist. I'm sorry if the paper I relied on some exponential flows. If you want to share your extensive rants on the merits of various keyboard layouts, send them to me at doctorov@boingboing.net, and I'll be sure to read them over carefully. I won't go into various kinds of layouts. There are better speakers at this conference who actually use other layouts than QWERTY. I really like my keys to be there where I look for them, and it usually, like, maybe it's a kind of Stockholm syndrome, but usually the speed of typing is not something that blocked me. Like usually when I try to type really fast, the resulting code is still, like I hit the right letters, the code is just not very good. So I probably over time will check out other layouts, but I don't really want to discuss them at the moment. This is a Space Cadet keyboard. This is a wonderful keyboard that has a lot of going for it. It's very old. It has wonderful modifier keys. I'll read them out from here. There's a control, but there's also meta. There's super and hyper. There's a top, Greek, and shift modifier keys, all here. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4 Roman numeral keys. There's like, dislike, that person and that other person keys in there. The top row, going from left, is macros. So you have, macro-enabled keyboard, which means it's good. There's a terminal, there's a quote key, there's things like overstrike key, and so on and so forth. So, it's not something very new. Like, there were keyboards that did this kind of things much earlier and were much more configurable. If you look closer, it even has the arrow keys, but they are shifted by one. It's GH, JK, and then the L is kind of this both weight arrow. And it has a lot of, I don't know whether you've seen the APL video, how to program an APL from 1975. I will link it at the end of the slides. It's a wonderful example where the person is typing actually at the terminal, so it looks like they're at a kind of old mechanical typing machine. Typewriter is the word, but it's actually, it looks like a typewriter, it's actually a terminal to a computer, and they are actually using all of those mathematical symbols because APL is a programming language that uses those. So I assume this is one of the keyboards that could be very useful for typing APL, and all of the Greek letters are in this ninja labeling thing that I mentioned, where there are labels on the vertical parts of the keyboard, and this is probably my next key layout that I'll be using, not necessarily the Greek one, but one with letters in there. When it comes to layers and mapping, there are general, if you want to think about layers, just think about how you use Shift and Control and Alt. keys on your keyboard. You basically, the other keys change meaning depending on whether you keep one of the layer keys pressed or more than one. They also allow for proper typography. If you're Polish, actually the default Linux layout nowadays is this one. So you probably know some of those keys, like you know how to get, I don't know, things like Polish diacritics if you want to write in Polish, or Portuguese diacritics if you want to write Portuguese, but there are also all the other stuff, and they're easily available. The ones on the left are basically like this one is when you press the keys unmodified. This is with Shift, obviously. This is with Right Alt. This is with Right Alt and Shift. So for me, for example, I like having proper typography because also it triggers a lot of people who don't like proper typography and think it's kind of pretentious. So I'm very diligent in using that in those emails. But you know, things like ellipses or proper quotes, they are usually all there in your keyboard layout. You might not know this, but if you used to like press the Alt button and put in like 3 or 4 digit code on the numerical keyboard on Windows computers, you don't have to do this on contemporary systems. But what is super interesting is that a lot of those keyboards are programmable. It's a whole world of your own. You can program the keyboard to behave like you want it, and contrary to the configuration to your operating system, this is looked around with the keyboard. So if you're a gamer and you want a particular shortcut to be available on your keyboard, then you can program it, take this keyboard, and it will work at a LAN party, if you know what that is. Pure Pro has a PN layer. Pure Pro is the orange one that makes the round. It has a dedicated PN layer, and the things that I, for example, configured it is my email address. I really dislike making typos in my email address because it's hard to register when people write to an email address that is of one character. So like you don't notice that they wrote it. So I have like FNE and it just types my email address. Like PNE and just types my email address. It's very useful if you don't want to make typos or if you have any kind of combinations that you really use often. The Tada68 is the other one, the one with the Tada community usually refers to them as wonderfully vintage labels. I still perceive them as very crude, but maybe, you know, they grow on me. I like them to a point. I don't think they're very elegant, but that keyboard has this wonderful advantage that it has a GUI editor. You can actually click around. You don't have to write it as any kind of scripts. The Pure Pro layout by default looks like this, so there are those arrows, but what I really like about this is one-to-one with my laptop. So I can actually switch between my laptop and the orange one keyboard when it works without breaking a sweat. All the keys are in the same, almost in the same position, even the home and page up and page down with function key is the same as on my Asus, but you can reprogram your keyboard to match your laptop if you're switching between those often. And it's a very nice default keyboard. It even has this app key, which is the context menu. So FNX is the right-click menu if you don't want to reach for your mouse and so on. It has the insert key. It has print screen and so on. There are just function P, for example. This is the default FN layer of the Tada keyboard. The wonderful thing there is if you keep the FN key pressed, the arrows become your mouse pointer, and the shift is left click and the control is right click, so you can actually operate your mouse with your keyboard if you want to. Obviously like multimedia keys, but you can reprogram this if you want. And this is from Rafał Cieślak, a tweet. He also got a Tada and is very happy about this. Thanks to ImageMagick's and GitHub's magic, I can compare my keyboard layouts because you can do this thanks to GitHub, which is you take screenshots of your keyboard layout and then you either compare them side by side or you use the swipe option or the onion skin option, and you know exactly where that key went on that 1 a.m. remapping session that you had 3 weeks ago. And it's obviously not there where you expect it now. I want to speak very briefly about caps lock. Please don't use it as caps locks unless you really want to. I used to remap it to compose, which I'll cover in a second, but it's like there are better keys to remap to compose. If you have a pause key on your keyboard, that's probably a good key to remap to anything else. I remap my right control to compose nowadays, but in general, remapping it to control not only makes a lot of sense if you're an Emacs user and don't have like 12 fingers, but also it's historically, the reason why Emacs uses control so much is because in historical keyboards, this is where control was. It wasn't caps lock, it was control. So remapping it to control is not totally like a thing that some people just stumbled on. But if you're a Vim user, you not necessarily might want to remap it to control that much, or the thing is, it really grows on you. When I use a different keyboard and it doesn't have caps lock remap to control, I'm lost for like 5 minutes at least. But Vim users really like their escapes. They don't necessarily want to use like Control-C instead of escape because that's like 2 key presses. So some of them remap caps lock to escape, but there's a thing you can remap it in a way that if you keep it pressed, it's a control, but if you just tap it, it's escape. It's called Xscape on Linux. It's on macOS. There's a solution, and I think in OS Sierra you don't have to use third-party applications for this. So it's actually super useful once you get used to it. You basically get a control and an escape under a very easily reachable button that is not very useful otherwise. There are Macs coming without the escape key. As you might know, the text says, well, here's the problem, you use a cool text editor and you really need access to hardware escape key, then all of a sudden this comes along. No physical key inside, maybe Apple will offer a dongle. Now you need to purchase a bunch of home and work that doesn't sound workable at all. So there's a project that lets you pair your phone with your Mac and use that phone as an escape key. This is how it looks on the phone. It can be your iPad. It can be your iPad Plus or however the big ones are called. So yeah, it's a very, very fruitous, I think, community. A lot of things happen. But just to cover, and this is the wrap-up of the talk, the compose key, this is also something that you can do without any kind of mechanical keyboard. You can just do it with your current laptop. It's a dead key, which means it doesn't register when you press it, but it lets you easily combine things in a way that are usually very easy for us to remember or actually try out without really being sure what it means. And I think the best example is umlaut. If you're into metal music or you're from one of those countries who are so much into metal music that they introduced umlauts to their language, you can just press the compose key, nothing will show up. You can press the U, nothing will show up. Then you press the double quotes and suddenly U umlaut shows up. And the biggest advantage of the compose key is once you get a feel for it, you don't have to remember those combinations. Like A umlaut, it just is A with quote marks. C, like compose C comma will give you the C with this nice comma at the bottom that I think the Portuguese and French use. So it's very easy to come up in your head with compose combinations and then try out and realize they're actually implemented that way. So things like minus and greater than sign give you an arrow, and like all of the arrows are implemented that way. You can do caret 2 and it gives you superscript 2 if you want to square something or if you want to have fancy footnotes. Compose less than 3 gives you a nice Unicode heart symbol. This is something that you might not use very often, but when you do, you usually just copy it from somewhere else. This is a promile sign, but it looks like a percent sign with additional O, so the compose combination is just %O. This is how you get a non-breaking space. So compose space space gives you a non-breaking space, and there are other combinations like compose. And this is a wonderful example of very Western appropriation because these are CCCP, but they actually should be SSSR. But the people who configure compose do not want you to reconfigure your keyboard to Cyrillic, so they just appropriated CCCP to let you do this. So things we didn't cover. Things we didn't cover is, those 4 a.m. moments when you're super hungry and everything is closed and then you realize that your keyboard amassed enough food that you can make it to the morning. There are prominent Ruby community speakers with prominent Ruby community speaker cuts, and from what I recognize so far, they basically solve the problem of cleaning the keyboard by getting a new keyboard every half a year. That's a solution. Like when I was reassembling the orange keyboard, I spent like an hour cleaning it. It was 4 times as much as I spent putting the keys in. There are different key shapes. As I mentioned, there are ones that are round and supposedly very nice. There are different plastic types. I covered them a little bit, but over time you actually realize that it's too late and you start recognizing them. There are different kinds of USB cables. There's a whole USB community who fights over whether the cable should be threaded or not, whether it's nicely to touch, whether it has certain Apple cable qualities, or whether it actually will last for 2 weeks, and so on. There's a thing that is called N-key rollover, which basically lets you press any combination of keys and it will register, which is not something that is very common in other keyboards. In most keyboards, certain parts of the keyboard are wired in a way that basically keys shadow each other. So a proper, wonderful top-end mechanical keyboard will let you press any combination, and it will register as any combination of those keys. So, to wrap it up, your world lamination plans. Please read A Modern Space Cadet. It's a wonderful blog post by Steve Losh, who describes this topic in a very nice way and also has a lot of references to the Space Cadet keyboard. Please watch this APL demonstration from 1975. It has nothing to do with mechanical keyboards, but it's a wonderful thing to see, how people made screencasts back then when they didn't have screens, for starters. There are 2 mechanical keyboard guides that if you want to get a feel for it and either be sucked in or totally put away, then these are very quick triggers to get you either way. There's a WASD Keyboards Flickr page that shows screen after screen of colorful layouts. Some of them are even possible. There's a Mechanical Keyboards Reddit. If you are not into Reddit, there's a Reddit mech bot on Twitter that retweets all of the pictures. So if you just want to get a feel of what this community basically is about, then subscribe to, follow Reddit mechbot. There's the Storytee website with a forum and a wiki. The wiki is usually more useful for starters. And there are, if you want to build your own keyboard, there is a very nice tutorial on a website that is very nicely named Massively Parallel Procrastination. So there's those 2 parts. There are other things keyboards related that you might want to get if you're into this eventually. Thanks so much. I'm Piotr. I work for Rebased. We are a very nice Ruby and Rails shop. If you need something done with our keyboards or without, we have people from both sides of the debate. The talk is already at talks.net if you want to watch the slides or click the links. Thank you so much.